up here with us if you want to. Or maybe we could even like.
I'm gonna wheel myself around.
I'm cool right here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be all over. Because this does not need to be formal by any means. And again, just because the furniture's in this classroom setup, we are not here to lecture. Hey, everything, and it's like super light. I like it.
Have you been in here before? And
I've been in here, but not with this setup.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's more people making noise here too.
Okay.
They're comfortable. We should get these for chambers.
I know these are actually more comfortable than the.
Are they stackable? I bet they are.
They kind of fold and then you can.
Is there new furniture in the budget this year? Are we starting? We can get started.
Can we kick things off?
Sure. So good evening, everyone, and welcome. Oh, we've got 2 more people coming in, so I'll hold off on my welcome for just another second here. Hi, welcome.
Thank you.
Good.
So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off here. It is, it is about
A few more people
6:30. Perfect.
making their way.
Perfect. And this is our second Councilor Corner Live. This was an initiative that the Council Communications Committee started over the winter. And our first session was on growth, and we had about 40 people attend. And then we decided that our next session would be sustainability and conservation. There's no real structure or format. We do not make an agenda ahead of time. Really, this is an opportunity for residents to come and have access to, specifically to the counselors. We do have some staff here to support us in case people would like resources that we just don't have, or I can point you toward the right resources. John and I do not pretend to be experts by any means, but really the goal is to listen to your concerns or questions, comments. And if you're looking for resources, hopefully we'll be able to point you toward the right resource. But really, we just want to hear from our residents what is on your mind. And what I said, we had a joint conservation. I'm also the liaison to the Conservation Commission and the Sustainability Committee. And we had a joint meeting on Monday. And I wrapped up that meeting by saying, don't assume that just because something is happening at the committee level or in your neighborhood, that it's rising to the level of council. And so, we have committees who are doing great work, amazing work, but it's not always making its way all the way to the council. And so this is an opportunity for you to have access to go right to us with your comments and questions.
So these comments will get to the council?
Well,
Well-
so John and I are counselors.
Yeah.
So technically you
Yeah.
have access to
You'll
us
share.
right now.
And we have Councilor Tucci in the
We
back.
have Chairman Clucci joining us. And really, we certainly debriefed the rest of the council. Many of the council were at the talk on growth, but for those that were watched, but those that weren't there, we certainly debriefed them and gave them an overview. But again, these are taped. And so, it gives counselors who can't be here the opportunity to hear what you guys have to say too.
Yeah. And I would just add that we're here as elected officials, not necessarily representing the council. So anything we share tonight is really just our personal opinions as individuals. And, but again, we're happy to bring the feedback back to the council. And some of the things like I'll try and do today is just capture some notes or actions that we can make sure, we can follow up with. I think the last one we aspired to do it, but I think we just got so enthralled in the conversation that, hopefully coming out of this, we can put together some sort of FAQ or information that we can make sure we bring back to the community and to the public about what we heard and what we learned and maybe some common questions that we got.
Does the town manager also get feedback from what they
Can't hear you.
Pardon?
Can't hear you.
Oh, yeah, I was asking whether Tom Hall gets feedback from what goes on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we have the,
Assistant Town Manager, Ian Gallagher is here, and our Sustainability Coordinator, Jamie Fitch is here also.
So I think we're all, like, again, this is just another forum and opportunity to get ideas, feedback, comments, again, that we can hopefully run with when we get back to doing normal business.
So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over. You can raise your hand if you'd like to speak. If we have a brave soul who'd like to go first, you guys direct the conversation, right? We didn't come with anything that we wanted to talk about specifically.
I'm very vocal, so.
Nina,
So, no, I have,
I have mine at home, but if you can,
well, I have two concerns. Well, there are a lot of concerns, but, the sustainability, of course, connected with growth. How is the sanitation department keeping up with everything? How about the traffic, which is horrific at certain hours, on and on. So you know that. The other thing is I really am concerned about the Phragmites that is growing everywhere. And I'm hoping that different organizations can get together and try to do something about it. And I know it's difficult because it's the roots that have to be gotten and you can't use Roundup and all that stuff. So those are my two points. Just wondering if anybody had any input on that.
what are Phragmites?
It's that awful grass.
Mhm.
It grows everywhere you look and it spreads like wildfire.
It's that, sorry,
Yeah, no,
it's that plumy plant you see on both sides of the one going on the
Okay.
marsh.
Hmm.
And you see some people taking in their pickup truck to put it in their arrangements.
Mhm.
It's kind of nice, but it's invasive,
Oh, okay.
so it's not very nice.
well, it's taking over the marsh in certain areas. And you can drive around and you have said it thrives because of the salt. Is that right?
It needs, I'm sleeping on, I'm board chair for the Friends of Scarborough Marsh. I have other issues that I'm doing here, but it thrives in low salinity environments, like on sides of roads, with little salt, just fresh water. So in 1999, I'm going to carry on here about Phragmites for a bit, but in 1999, Audubon did a study of the marsh. They found about 1.6% of 30,000 acres was covered with Phragmites. So, and most of it was, or half of it was north of Route 1. So we commissioned a consultant in 2018, and that number's gone up, it's tripled, it's now about 4.5%. And so when you look at where the major Phragmites stands occur, they generally occur adjacent to stormwater discharge structures. So like on Black Point Road, there's a long stretch, there's a half-mile stretch of ditch that dumps into a culvert that dumps into the segment of marsh that's covered. Next to Clearwater Drive, up along the Libby River, there's a huge stand there that down slope from detention pond discharges and so on.
What about Dunstan Corner, that whole Route 1 all the way down to Dunstan Corner? It's just,
Yeah, there's a big ravine that's a natural ravine behind lumber liquidators that channels a lot of stormwater from roads, from subdivisions, from parking lots, and it dumps it there. So when it dumps it, it's fresh water essentially. So there's enough salinity so the Phragmites can grow.
can there be anything to do about it?
Yeah, the thing to do about it, Jamie and I have talked about this once, is to, instead of discharging stormwater to the marsh surface, the marsh plain, discharge it to the rivers and streams, like go into the marsh. There's another problem there, but for example, where, you stop me, the board with this.
No, this is good.
Where, what's the name of the golf course here? Willowdale. Willowdale has huge ponds that discharge huge amounts of fresh water into the marsh, but they discharge it into a stream instead of on marsh surface. So there's very little Phragmites around there. If they were discharging to the marsh plain, when you walk on Eastern Trail in that area, it'd be humongous Phragmites stand. And so in order to do that, the town would need to get permits from DEP to discharge stormwater into the rivers and streams instead of on the marsh. So right now it's being discharged on the marsh where it's creating a problem Phragmites, and then it's eventually getting to the same waterways at some point. So it'd be best to just discharge it right to the streams and rivers. Because the marsh doesn't really, people say it filters, it doesn't really filter. It filters sediment, but it doesn't, I mean, the pollutants eventually get there. And the pollutants are, you know, residue from petroleum, gasoline, fertilizer, and so on. So,
Is there anything that can be done with the things that are there? I mean, I know you can't use chemicals, but I mean, there are places where, and I mentally just cut it right down, but there are places where it has been cut down, you know?
so, in 2000, between 2010 and 2013, but before I was on the associate, they cut them and they sprayed the roots with Roundup. They came right back in 3 years. I've been doing some research on the marsh, and I had to cut a path to my little research area. And within 4 weeks, what I'd cut had grown back to 2 feet, 24 inches. And now, if you went out there, you wouldn't know I cut a path. So it's really, I think once it's established, it's pretty resilient. I think the only recourse we have is to try to prevent it from occurring in the first place. And that's, I think we need to talk, but anyway, it's
Marvin has a question.
I'm going to join this and take it down this rabbit hole of invasive plants just 5 minutes more or something. I came tonight wearing my Proud's Neck Conservancy hat, which is a 501c3. I realize Proud's Neck billionaires, if not billionaires, eyes glaze over and all the rest in a certain way. Yeah, we're running an experiment down there with this 501c3 raising over, I'm not looking to raise money here. I'm the president of the organization. We have a very active board. Our mission is to control invasive plants on the peninsula of Proud's Neck. Small area, yet several acres. And I'm only joining this conversation in a sense with this fine gentleman, with Nina, because I want to add a tiny bit of hope on top of the subject of Phragmites. I spent half my year controlling invasive plants between November and March, again, in a localized area. It is possible to exhaust Phragmites, and we work with local, not for the Phragmites, herbicide applicators. We work with the Conservation of Maine Natural Areas Program. We have biologists and botanists, and we're publishing a field guide which will be able to be used beyond the borders of Proud's Neck. We're investing a lot of time, talent, and money in the experiment, and over the course, we have a $2 million capital campaign over 5 years. We've raised half of it. We're spending in the neighborhood of $70,000 to $100,000 a year on control practices. That's just labor to cut, treat, and remove. We work with the DEP. We work with code enforcement. Again, it's a localized area, but we're a resource that's available beyond Proud's Neck. And when the time comes, or if it ever comes, when you're wondering about invasive plants, what to do with them. Scarborough is this little gem of a place where you could probably take care of it.
That, I wonder if that would be like a good, because there's no formal relationship that you guys have right now with the town in terms of sharing that information.
They definitely strike off on our own. But no, other than we work with code enforcement closely, and they inspect. And I mean, we only deal with licensed professionals. It's not mom and pop going out doing something. It's by the book.
Yeah, I think just sharing the practices with the town, since this is a broader issue, would be beneficial to just understand what you guys are doing and figure out if that's something we can either replicate or you know, consider going forward as a solution to the existing problem, in addition to thinking about the other solution, which is trying to figure out where the stormwater goes, so it's not going directly into the marsh. Because that seems like a preventative measure, but we have the issue that you brought up that is already here, and so how do we, yeah.
Just want to make a statement on herbicides. We, other friends have decided we're not use herbicides. The town has spoken, and I think, you know, we're a environmental organization. And we're right on, the marsh is right in or on the water, so we're not going to use herbicides.
And you said that is part of your guys' strategy for Proximate is using herbicides.
We use them where licensed and where applicable. I mean, we work with the biologists for the state of Maine on fighting invasive plants. We attempt to first learn, but certainly yes, I mean, there are applications when that's appropriate, and there are applications when you can't do it.
Okay, great. Any other conversation on Phragmites or
I'll add a little
invasive?
just to the invasive species kind of discussion. Andrew Mackey, Executive Director of the Scarborough Land Trust. We manage about 1,500 acres in town, spread across town in different preserves. We constantly battle invasive species. Don't do a lot with Phragmites, but we do a lot with the other species. And it really is a complicated issue because it depends upon the species you're trying to manage. And in most cases, you're never getting rid of them. You're trying to get them to a level where you can manage them every year. They're very, there are very targeted herbicide applications that can be used. Just to give people a sense, you know, there are places that do foliar application or, you know, kind of broadcast spraying. But then there are very targeted things where you actually cut the stem of a plant and you paint just the stem. Or in the case, this has been used in Phragmites a little bit, you actually use basically a hypodermic needle and you inject it into the plant. Now it's incredibly labor intensive.
Yeah, sounds.
But those things can be done.
You would volunteer?
Okay, we have a volunteer.
We have one volunteer. We need one more.
We actually have a volunteer corps that goes out and battles invasive species. So anyone that wants to join, our stewardship coordinator or stewardship director coordinates that program. And we are happy to take as many people as possible because that's what it takes. It just takes constant attention to these things year after year.
And they're targeted, we cut and treat every step. In the rarest of occasions, foliar spray puts less chemical into the environment than any other and is the most effective. Once again, it's done under the supervision of the highest ranking professionals in the state.
This perspective, the marsh has about 150 to 100, up to 170 plus acres of dense Phragmites, you know, dense, so dense that there might be 14-foot stems in this area and growing in a inch circle. So it'd be a long way.
Yeah.
I'll do it.
Yeah. You have a volunteer. All right.
Yeah,
So that we talked on that topic. I know, Ben, it looked like you wanted to,
Well, after this, through.
yeah.
I think this is fluid,
Yeah.
but we also want to make sure that we kind of, you know, hit on everyone's issues and allow for different individuals to talk. So if you would like the floor,
Okay.
if you want to just introduce yourself, then
I'm Ben Bombachi, I'm a resident of Higgins Beach, been there for a lot of years. And I've been rather involved in the concerns of the erosion that's been happening in that area. And Jamie put together that climate action plan. And the thing that she did was identify Higgins Beach and Pine Point as two of the most vulnerable areas, neighborhoods in the town of Scarborough. And over the years, with the help of Mike Shaw, we've tried multiple versions of conservation, even to the point of taking sand from the river and bringing it up, which we couldn't do today, but we did that in the past. The last effort was doing sand trapping. And that worked for a short period of time. And that now, because of the last storm, that was a failure. So we've changed our focus, and because of global warming, the reality is that the only thing left is infrastructure. And the infrastructure at Higgins Beach is, according to the report that was put together, in tough shape. Two of the things that we're concerned about, and I sent visuals, we have the sewer line that runs on the full length of Bayview Avenue. And currently, from the high water mark, currently to the sewer cap is approximately 20 feet. Now, if we have a severe storm, we're gonna have a lot of flowing around. In addition to that, we have a pumping station on Champion Street that's above ground between two houses. Doesn't make sense, but that's where we're at. And it's, excuse me? And it's in the floodplain as well. So we have one short-term suggestion. And the suggestion would be to take the same concept that originally was put forth by Mike from bringing down the stone wall to Pearl Street and potentially extending that as a stopgap measure, short-term, until a more viable solution is made available. But the reality is that we're in tough shape. And according to the statement that was in the document that you put together, Maine can't wait. And I don't think Higgins is in a situation where they can wait either. I mean, what happened is I spoke to Stephen from the Public Works Department, and basically we talked about FEMA, we talked about what could be possibly done. FEMA reacts after the fact. We have to have a disaster. We can't do anything up front. We have to wait until we have a disaster. And so basically, we need to have some sort of a program and funding, and maybe it comes out of a bonding issue. We bond other things, but the reality is the infrastructure is most important. And a side note, I also heard that basically on the Eastern Trail, where the pumping station is, that was originally a sewage treatment plant, is in dire need of repair. No one talks about it. And I heard this from one of the councilors. So there's a lot of issues that relate to now rather than the future.
Yeah. Do we, I know right now we're doing a parks and facilities survey and master plan, and it asks about the beaches. And I don't know if everybody's seen that survey or if they've had the opportunity to take it, but I would just encourage you, if you haven't, I don't think we're getting into these types of specifics, but at least knowing that the beaches are important to the community will help us prioritize potentially any improvements we need to make. I don't know if we know, like, which department would this type of infrastructure fit into? Is it Public Works, or is it a different department where they would be looking at potentially funding some sort of wall, or like what you had
Well, in
suggested?
terms of talking to Steve, and we talked about potential because it was a small project that perhaps they could handle it. But he said it was beyond their scope,
Okay.
their capability,
Mhm.
that it would have to be done outside of their capability, or outside organization. And this is just a suggestion. I'm not saying this is God, but we've got to start somewhere.
Mhm.
And I mean, the beach is gone. There's no beach. At high tide, and particularly this summer, it's going to be a disaster because people are going to be on the rocks sitting rather than on the beach, because at high tide, there's virtually no beach. It goes from Pearl Street down to Ashton.
I mean, John asked a great question in terms of which department to even necessarily get the ball rolling on this kind of work. And, you know, it's entirely possible that part of the reason why there isn't more momentum is because Public Works, you know, is operating in a silo and isn't sure how to address the situation, but they've now said this is beyond our scope. But nobody else was, you know, next in line to pick up that ball.
Mhm.
You know, I'm sure that if we bring this to, you know, Tom would know, like if I
Well,
brought
Peter
this back to Tom
Skavinsky-
and said, where can we put this?
Peter Skavinsky is a state geologist. He lives in Scarborough. And we've had interactions with him. I think he would be a logical person to interact with. And he has obviously the experience and potentially consult. It wouldn't be a cost factor, I wouldn't think. Because he's come down more than once to talk with us in terms of what we potentially could do, what hasn't worked, that kind of thing. He's been very helpful.
I also wonder if, 'cause I know Sophie Warren is a huge proponent against climate change, and I'm wondering if there's something at the state level too, where for these types of projects, I don't know, Jamie, if you're aware of any like state funding or opportunity where we could potentially look at this as a project where we need to submit a grant or something to get some sort of support to combat what sounds like it's a climate change issue where is it that the tides are coming up and kind of wearing away?
Well, yeah, I mean, if we have a major, like we did the last time,
Mhm.
God knows, it could, I'm projecting maybe 5 years before it hits, but potentially, when we had that Silver Sands disaster, it could happen in a year.
Mhm.
We can't control the oceans, obviously.
Could I add something?
Yeah.
Because,
Absolutely.
on that subject, people don't talk about the town's growth and how it's going to affect the beaches. In 5 years, there'll be more children and more people. And I just wanted that to be in your heads, because that's an important factor. Because as it is now, as Vin said, at high tide, all the people bring their chairs up on those rocks.
Mhm.
There's no beach.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they have to go down to the river.
Mhm.
There's plenty of sand down to the river, but everybody always, they like what's convenient. And that's what's close,
I mean, I will say that the subject of beaches did come up at our last forum when we talked about growth. And so if that's of any comfort, like this is
Okay.
not, that's not the first time that we've heard that.
Mhm.
And so that's definitely on the radar.
Mhm.
Yeah. wanna add
I
something?
just wanted to add to the seawall conversation, that the seawall that's there now is really installed, right on the cusp of when I came to Scarborough, but it goes from, correct me if I'm wrong, from Houghton to Pearl Street.
Yeah.
And that was, town would have all that information, and
Sure.
studies and what kind of wall to put up and all of that kind of thing. It was quite an extensive plan, and then they put in, I think we call it riprap, those big boulders that they put in. So I think probably, what may be, a next phase of that might just extend that wall
Mhm.
down to, what did you say, Ashton, Ben?
Yes, yeah,
Ashton Street?
yeah, that's good, yeah. But referring back to that, originally they got FEMA funding on that. And I think the town kicked in around 350,000. And I think the whole project ended up being about 450, 500. I'm just guessing, but going back to that period. So that's good. But in terms of talking to Stephen, he said doing that kind of concept today would be millions.
Mhm.
He was rather discouraging in terms of the cost factors
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
with everything
we
else.
bond all kinds of things and, this is important to you, so I.
Well, it's
I
important to the
appreciate-
community,
yeah.
really, because
Yeah.
if that sewer line breaks, there are 300 homes on that beach. Plus the tourism,
Mhm.
plus the loss to the town of Scarborough tax dollars.
Yeah, I mean, this is, seeing the pictures that you shared, I think
Yeah.
So
was,
glad you couldn't show it, because the picture is worth 1,000 words, you know?
maybe that's something we can share the
Yeah.
pictures with the, I didn't
Yeah.
have the opportunity to share them with the entire council yet, but I think just sharing that. And if you have your material too in an email that we can share too, that's a good way for us to get it to the rest of the council to look at.
Email,
Yeah, if you can
Okay.
share, because you shared some good stuff in
well, I
the,
have several copies, I think they're black and white. but
I would give one of them to the gentleman right behind you. Because he'll take one.
Thank you.
And I can, if you want to leave those with us, we can bring them to the
Okay.
rest of
Happy
the
to
council.
distribute those. with
Yeah.
you, so.
Mhm. I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah, Tricia Daly, I also live in the beach. I cannot politely understand why Portland 2016, I believe, stopped all spraying, and Scarborough is still spraying. They spray every day almost at Higgins Beach. And you see these signs, caution, that should be a scarlet crossbow. I'm tired of it. I won't walk in it. I will not, my dog walk in it. And I will clubhouse until recently that I was fighting it, was they were mainly grass was spraying there. And I asked then current president and her cousin who had been president just prior to, that they were spraying. They said they would get back to me. They never did. I called mainly spring and found out within 5 minutes that what they were spraying was lethal to birds, bees, and fish. I live at the beach. Give me a break. I'm still walking around saying caution. I'm tired of it. And why is Scarborough done that? Because it's stopping spraying. I don't understand it. I just don't.
Do you know?
Can you,
Yeah.
well, can you be a little, I'm not familiar with necessarily what you mean by spraying and where, and can you just kind of paint a picture for me? People, private citizens
Herbicides
are
and
spraying their
pesticides,
lawns.
they spray, and
Okay,
they're entitled to do that.
okay,
And a lot of them do it, and I'm just beside myself.
okay. I wanted to make sure I understood.
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
I'd like to just add to that, I live in, Park Point Road in condos on the line. And I practically lay down in front of the truck, but,
Good for you, but I'll join you.
but they can't, but I think it's, the tree company comes and sprays the trees. And after they spray, we hear no birds. No. And the other thing is, they say, oh, this is organic. Well, I've tried to get them to tell me what they're doing, and I haven't had a terrible time getting anybody to respond. So it would be great if it was a blanket thing throughout the whole community to make sure that these tree and lawn companies realize they absolutely cannot spray.
I don't understand, with you know, with me, obviously, that 2 towns have stopped it years ago, and we will have all the bodies of water, the marshes. It's just not because I'm a Higgins Beach, but I don't walk on these lawns, nor do I allow my dog to walk on these lawns. My children playing at the clubhouse. They just stopped finally 2 years ago because the then president and her husband prior to that, they never got back to me, and I called mainly, whatever the company was doing the spraying, and indeed it was toxic to birds, fish, bees. Bees are very important. I have signs in my front lawn saying be safe. If anyone has ever gone to Eddie Wood, he's a conservative, right in Scarborough, wonderful garden, wonderful, but he uses no chemicals, period. You couldn't find a nicer place on earth. So why is Scarborough? That's what I want. Why so lax and really killing people? And at one time, across from the clubhouse, there were 3 women who were being treated with chemo. The same time they're spraying directly, one was beside and 2 was across the street. They are all 3 dead. I'm not saying that the spraying had something to do with it, but you don't make a bad disease worse by spraying. That's all I can say.
You said 2 towns, though, are no longer spraying. Do you know which town?
Portland,
Portland and South Portland?
2016, I believe.
And Haskell trees, that's who it is. You know, and if it is organic, why do they leave these signs?
Right.
I mean, why do they leave these signs? Plus the fact, I am very, very sensitive to any chemicals. I mean, I go into Ace Hardware and I run weed. And after they spray, you can feel it, and they tell everybody you have to close the windows when you spray. Well, if it's harmless, you know.
Right.
So it would be wonderful. I couldn't agree more.
The scent is invasive, so you have to close your windows. And I questioned some people today who were spraying, and this was from mosquitoes. You're not going to get rid of mosquitoes, I'm sorry, but that's not long to believe that. And they said they were using mainly cedar, but 20% inert products. Now, what are these inert products? as opposed to the cedar. I don't trust any of these spray companies, period, as far as I can tell them. And I would like, not just for where I live at King's Beach, but all of Scarborough, which follows through the South Portland area and that are act together. And I don't know to whom to go.
You're going to the right place, I think.
Okay.
But you know, what would be interesting that I'm thinking about too, is like, how do we communicate to the public alternative means? Like you said, like if there's something else that can be done that's more natural. I don't know if we do anything like that
I
today
don't
or.
know if it is. I mean, this is nature. Mosquitoes have been around much longer than I have. You know, if you want to protect yourself, put something on your own body.
Yeah,
Don't spray the whole neighborhood.
you have options. You
And
could put 'em up
when I looked at directly across the street from the clubhouse, they had just sprayed, and I found in my backyard a goldfish, not a mark on it. They had just sprayed. They killed that goldfish.
Mhm.
I didn't know at the time that they were spraying. It took me like 10 minutes to call. And I found out, the people who were in charge of that never looked into it.
Yeah.
And they did not follow up. They're, thank God, off the board now.
So we do, I mean, Conservation
Yeah.
Commission just merged with Pest Management, who regulates the spraying on town properties. And, you know, I know that this predates me. I don't know if this predates you, Jamie, that all of the pesticide ordinances and things. As you can imagine, it is a heavily contested conversation. Because there are plenty of people who feel like that is their private property and, you know, that what they want to do on their private property.
I'm sorry.
So, you know, I think that there's definitely some conversation to be had. I would have to look at the last time that policy was updated, because I honestly don't know, but I do know that at the committee level, we have people whose whose responsibility it is to look at that policy and to make sure it's being enforced and to make recommendations to Tom. And then also Conservation Commission, having recently merged with Pest Management,
Mhm.
could definitely, within that committee, there could be some education, I think. But I also know that one of Conservation Commission's goals for this year was to really start looking at what pieces they could do for education and whatnot. And so that might be a great place to start.
It might also just be interesting to see what South Portland and
Sure.
Portland have in their own ordinances and like what they're doing. If they've
I
already,
did, excuse me, I'm interrupting, but I did call and I got no response. This was several years ago. And then I wanted to know
So
how they were allowed to.
I can share a little bit. So the town's pest management policy, organic pest management policy went into effect in 2011, and it only applies to town properties.
Right.
The Portland and South Portland's ordinances are largely symbolic and education-based, so there's not a whole lot of enforcement involved with them, but just trying to get information out to the public. People know that there's an ordinance that prevents the use of pesticides. Their hope is that there will be compliance, and then it was a lot of education and just providing information and resources to people for the preferred ways to take care of your lawn. The Pest Management Advisory Committee, which is now part of Conservation Commission, has provided information for years, and we've done articles in the Leader and the town newsletter on a regular basis. They've sponsored and promoted workshops for people to learn how to transition their lawn from kind of the conventional chemical focused lawn care practices to more natural, healthy lawn care practices. And as April said, the goal is to expand that and do more. I know that there are members on the committee who would love to see a townwide ordinance. And I think that really what needs to happen is that for local support and for people to voice their support of that, because there's always, it is a contentious issue. There's always going to be people in opposition, but if the voices that are in support of it are louder, then change may happen.
Mhm.
I may be 2 years old, how long do I have to wait?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we did at the last one that I just enjoyed was like when somebody shared something, just to get the pulse of the attendees, they would say like, here, just to kind of reiterate that they share that feedback. So I think as we go around and share stuff, if somebody says something that resonates with you, just so that we can kind of understand the room a little bit, I think if you want to just chime in with a here.
Here.
Here. I almost did that, but there were many here that weren't at that meeting.
Yeah,
We would have had your back. We would have had your back.
Yeah.
So one of the things Pete Slavinsky had actually mentioned when we were working through some of the comprehensive plan, was possibly expanding, maybe not going townwide, but sensitive areas, particularly around the marsh, maybe taking a step in this direction. I think that would be supported, or could be more easily supported.
Yeah.
When you start to rent rural areas and farms, it can be, I think, a little more contentious.
Mhm.
But anyways, that's something that I would fully support. I think it would be better. I don't think we go all the way.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's almost like
I
this.
won't catch that comment with 10-foot cold.
Yeah.
One of the things the Friends of,
I would go all the way, that's what I'm going to say.
one of the things the Friends of Scarborough Marsh had proposed a couple of years ago was marsh taking. So what you're talking about, pizza on a board, so that you would care for your lawn and your trees and whatnot in an environmentally sensitive manner, without pesticides, without fertilizer moderation, or not at all. And so anyway, we haven't moved on that for lack of resources, being people, we're a volunteer board, just too much going on. So we were hoping that, maybe we could interact with the pesticides committee and the conservation commission to advance that this year and next.
Mhm. Randy?
My name is Randy Hogan, and I'm the chair of the Conservation Commission. And I'm barely in my seat because I'm very excited to hear all the ideas and the support and the concerns that you're raising. Because as Jamie mentioned, we've just expanded our commission to 9 members, and I'd like to read our goals to you because you'll hear what we've been bringing up as the work that we're doing. But we also see ourselves not just 9 people, but all of you and more who will be able to support us and advance these ideas and requests and goals for the town. So just real briefly, we have 3 goals. Top is conserving land, including mapping the wetlands and treating stormwater management as an opportunity, connecting trails and conserving land, and incorporating a goal of conserving 30% of the land in the community by 2030, which is a national goal, also mentioned in the state goal. We have a ways to go in Scarborough, as you might imagine, but that's one of our actions we'd like to take. Building resiliency, so coastal hazards, flooding, maintaining existing farms, protecting the health of our watersheds. And part of that is we're creating a climate action plan. We're looking at Route 1 that crosses the marsh, how we can expand coastal conservation. These overlay zones that we just mentioned about how we can look at different zones in the town to set standards for how we deal with these areas, particularly as it relates to different practices. And then we're really excited that we've merged with Pest Management Advisory Committee because we, as noted here, we want to take what has been done with the town and really look at how can we expand that through education and modeling after what Portland and South Portland have done. But we need support from residents. And then our last and third goal is promoting engaged citizen stewardship of all of this, which just includes the education. So, Marvin, you're talking about the guidebook, the field guide of South Neck Conservancy, other issues and information we can share through the newsletter, through the newspaper, on the website, Conservation Commission section of Scarborough website. I'm also really excited that members of the commission, Pete's been mentioned several times, really just find knowledge, talent, and skills among all the members. And then I think we've got board representation on all the great nonprofits, the Scarborough Land Trust, there's a board member on the Conservation Commission, Friends of Scarborough, as you mentioned, Eastern Trail. There's a lot of overlap, but we need more support, and thanks for this time. I'm very excited to do this, and thanks to the counselors for sponsoring.
Yeah. Do we have, just mentioning what you just said about all those connected groups, do we ever have like a Scarborough
North Summit.
Summit? Yeah.
Right?
Of
Like
all
that.
of these different groups that have shared missions, and like, to me, there could be some silos operating, and there's an opportunity to better bring these groups together, because these aren't, like you said, everybody's interested in these same problems, but everybody's tackling it slightly differently. And I feel like if we could get aligned and be consistent, there might be some shared opportunities and shared resources that could be used to address some of these. So I don't know if we've done that before, but I feel like that would be an interesting thing to do, and maybe have like an annual summit of this nature just to
Yeah.
talk about this stuff. 'Cause I think it's real issues that need to get solved.
I love it. Tomorrow, the state is doing something around conservation and the minimum waste fund action plan, and how municipalities can plug into that. So a couple of us are attending by Zoom. But one step in that direction of collaborating, the Sustainability Committee and the Conservation Commission met recently together to look at ways that we might be able to advise the town council on how it can consider the growth management ordinance waiver request from the down, and taking into consideration the goals the Conservation Commission has and the Sustainability Committee has. That was an exciting meeting, and sort of,
Mhm.
picture of things to come.
Yeah, if you guys haven't had a chance to watch it, I watched it, and it was a really interesting meeting. And even though it was on the Downs exemption, it was really, to me, a broader conversation to some degree on just development in general, and what are solutions that we could potentially put in place that as we continue to grow and develop, that we're putting mechanisms in place that encourage solar, electric vehicles. As we think about land, like how do we ensure contiguous connection with,
Connectivity.
yeah, connectivity. So I think there's like this huge opportunity, this huge area around sustainability where we need to kind of further explore. And I know Rick, I think, was very vocal in that meeting where you were like, well, we need to do it now and we can't take a year. And so I feel like that's, something I would highly encourage that we kind of continue to push and think about, is like, how do we, address conservation and sustainability efforts as we build, to make sure that those principles are included so that we can really minimize the impact. Like one of the things that I learned in that I thought was interesting was, you can be solar ready, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're using solar. And so what good is it to make things solar ready if nobody's actually required to have to do something or reduce their carbon footprint or be all electric or something like that? So just some interesting ideas there that I would like to understand a little bit more too.
Where do you see that?
Where do I see what?
What you said that there's a video?
Oh, yeah, so if
It's
you,
on- Yeah, no, it's on YouTube, on our YouTube channel.
What
Yeah.
meeting is it?
It was Monday night, this past Monday, Joint Conservation Commission Sustainability.
Mhm.
We met at 6:00.
Just want to add one more thought to this discussion, in that I think a good place to start is through ordinance. And I appreciate, I'm looking at what South Portland did, and with their ordinance, they passed it in September 16. And then they transitioned and phased in organic land practices over, went into effect in May of 17 for municipal property, and in May of 18 for private property, and May of 19 for golf courses. And I can appreciate what Councilor Preacher's saying, is that you've got, farms involved, but with ordinances, even if we have an ordinance, a lot of the ordinance ordinances aren't necessarily enforced, and there's education that has to continue on after an ordinance is put in place. So to me, that would be the place to start, and then roll the education as part of developing that ordinance.
If I might,
Yeah, right.
I think Scarborough has evolved now, and we're getting ourselves are situating ourselves in a great opportunity. We went through the process of developing this new town comprehensive plan, and we're now so eager to begin implementation of that plan. But to do that, we have to go back and look at our ordinances and bring them up, and this takes time. But I guess the point I want to make is, you all can be part of that process of working to transition our ordinances and bring them up to that vision that we all share and develop into our comprehensive plan. And it's just taking time. And, you know, I'm one of the most impatient ones. If I could have an ordinance go through in less than a year, I would jump up and down and fix it. But reality, and unfortunately, reality in my mind has become evolved because of I see it every day. The amount of time it takes in order to bring stakeholders together, get us out of our little silos, and really get to work. And I think we're beginning to say, okay, there is work now, and we have the vision, now we have to get the work done. And, you know, the town has lots of committees, and we have lots of volunteers doing this, but we need more. We need more people that are willing to fight the fight and get down and write it down in pencil and paper and say, this is, thou shalt be able to do this, and thou shalt not be able to do this. And begin to take that vision that we have and make it a reality in form of ordinances, regulations, and education.
You're here.
We're here, yeah. Well, I think that's what you guys talked about. You're like, yeah, only 7 of us are on the committees today, or how many there are. If there were 20 of you.
Sometimes that's
Yeah.
a blessing in disguise.
Yes, yeah.
Because you get 20 different opinions, like what color do you want to paint the wall?
Yeah.
Well, there's 20 people, you can have 20 different colors.
Yeah.
But I think that generally speaking, you've got to remember, we have the vision here. We like where the vision is going to take us. We just have to work to get us there. And that requires everybody. It requires sessions like this to help us.
So what is the vision?
Read the comprehensive, well, a vision about what?
Well, you're talking about a vision, is part of the vision growth?
Well, every town's gonna grow. I mean, Maine is gonna grow. Look at the lifestyle that you enjoy. Everybody wants that life. So yes, Scarborough's gonna grow. Every town's gonna grow. How do we do it? We gotta have a vision. And our comprehensive plan is fantastic. You help with it. Everybody helps with it. We need to put it to use.
I just to add to that, and then
And I say you, I don't mean you personally. I
Yeah.
mean, you're a person of Scarborough.
I think that is a good, like, I would just recommend, because even in the comprehensive plan, we do have a vision statement around conservation. And in it, as Rick alluded to, there's a lot of ideas and vision statements of what we want. But the reality is there needs to be a clear action plan supporting that, which I think are some of the things that the different committees work through. Is like, after looking at that, and I think even long range, right, is working. We have another committee called the Long Range Planning Committee that was kind of the leader for developing the comprehensive plan. And they started a process of starting to work with each committee to say, okay, we said we want to do these things. What are we going to do specifically to address them? Am I stealing your thunder? Right, because you're on the long range planning.
Oh,
So I don't want to, yeah. Or just you smiling, so I'm like, oh, am I stealing his thunder?
I do have one very tiny. little
Okay.
one that helps.
But I just think that's, maybe that's a question though that I can ask you is, I know the long range planning has been working on helping to create more specific action plans around the comp plan. on the topic of conservation and sustainability, do you know like where you guys are with that and how that started to trickle down more to the other committees?
Long-range planning. I certainly don't represent the committee. I sit on it, voting member. As I understand it, long-range planning is a clearinghouse. And we recognize in the comprehensive plan, which we helped draft, what needs specific attention. And then we assign it with, the consultant of the town to various committees. Sometimes we assign it to 2 committees. And then we tackle our own more broad subjects as well, not getting down to the nitty-gritty of saying what the conservation committee would be or conservation commission would be involved. That's the best I can do. And we get sidetracked at times, but I couldn't agree with the gentleman over there more. The comprehensive plan, as everybody described it, it's not prescriptive. That doesn't get you out from underneath having to prescribe within those broad boundaries what you want, action wants. May I make a time?
Yep.
I was so focused on not the 35,000 foot view, but like the very close to the ground view. This gentleman over here about Higgins Beach, I thought I heard you say, you're losing the sand. There's no beach.
Yeah.
And I happen to sit on another committee, which is the Coastal Waters and Harbor Committee. And we met this week. This is, I think there were 135,000 cubic yards of sand dredged. And it was dispensed. None of it really went to the western beach near Crowd's Neck. It all went, and don't make them ask me, I should know more about it. But it sounds to me, when you think about where something might require attention, if Higgins Beach needs sand, there was 135 cubic yards. That obviously that's a long way to go from the Saco River around to Higgins Beach, but where there's a will, there's a way.
Well, we had spoken to Steve about the fact that the sand was going to be put onto the western beach. His understanding at the time was there was a change in plans that was going to go to Old Orchard, which negated that whole concept. The problem with bringing the sand back to Higgins Beach, and we've done this by taking seaweed and the public works as storage for the summer, the winter. We bring it back onto the beach after it's been purified. It doesn't work. It just dissipates. It's gone. And, I'm a strong advocate of trying to bring sand back. It'll look nice, but it isn't gonna, unfortunately, we're beyond that. It's yesterday's news. It's a sad scenario. And that's why the reality is we've got problems and people have to just raise the fact that we gotta do something. And the biggest problem is the fact when they put that sewer line, in, they put it in the wrong spot.
I'm a big proponent of where there's a will, there's a way. And I've heard other, I hear you. I'm not-
We've done a
I will
lot of
retract
things in
my
terms of trying to
suggestion
save
about
the
that.
What about the sanitation department? Do they have something to do with that?
At this point, it's beyond, they have to move this, it's beyond me. It's
So
there.
then is what you're saying, if the dredge sand was brought to Higgins, it wouldn't stay at Higgins?
It didn't wash out. 12 years ago, we took the sand from the river and brought it up. And we planted dune grass and it worked. And it lasted about 5 or 6 years. And it dissipated and eventually it was gone. But because of global warming, we could do it. I'm open to it. But I'm just one person. But the reality is it ain't gonna be there next year.
Well, I suppose my suggestion is one committee that this issue may be brought to is the Coastal Waters and Harbor Committee. They have some expertise. It may not be moving the sand. It may be something else, engineering one.
Could I have some names then?
Well, Don panel is the council rep. or-
Yeah, we can
We can
recommend,
connect you.
yeah, we can,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, we can make that.
Good suggestion.
Yeah.
That's why we're here, right? Even if that's maybe not the completely right channel, you know, it at least is an avenue we can try. And that's why we're doing these forums, is to try and connect all these different people. You know,
But
we're
really,
so many experts in
It's
town.
wonderful, and it's so great that to just, the council is so receptive. And so, it's so nice that we are able to voice what our concerns are, and it really is wonderful that you give the time.
I think that's why we're here, right? We're here to, we're here to represent you guys and help bring your voice to the town to help find ways to address the concerns, and this is just
These
one
things
of-
would be a flop, and I think, I don't know if John has sat in one where literally no one has come. You know, all my budget ones that we try to do. But you know, I've sat on school committee, you know, open forums where we, you know, invited and we put it in the paper, and then we sit there and we call it after 15 or 20 minutes because it's lonely sitting in the room with just the elected officials. And so it's so important that we get this community engagement. And one of the reasons why this even came up at communications committee, you know, a few months ago was I was hearing some frustration about what was coming before the council. Why are developers always coming before the council? Why is so-and-so always coming before the council? Why is this always what the council agenda is? And we talked about it, and I said, you know, obviously there are some things that are, you know, time sensitive, and those are dictated by the town clerk, and she helps us set the agenda, and that's what we need to talk about. But it's the citizen committees that bring forward these initiatives that are, got to be loud, right? Like, that's how people are getting things done in other communities. That's how things get done in this community. And so we really just wanted to give people a voice to be loud to the council and to remind you that, you know, we are not going to hear these things necessarily unless there's some momentum behind them. And, you know, we do have all these committees and they do need volunteers.
Yeah.
So we're always pitching for that too.
And I think somebody said, if you want change, you have to like get involved and be involved. And that doesn't mean necessarily just emailing the council or coming to this, like those committees really do real work. And I think they're hungry for people to support and participate. And they're a really great way to get involved that's less formal, right? So I know a lot of people might not want to be in the formal meetings or come to the town council and speak at the podium. But at the committees, I think it's just much more informal where we can connect you with whoever's the chair of the Coastal Waters Committee. You can have a conversation, you can bring it to the committee and be a part of the conversation. And, you know, if you want to take a crack at an ordinance to draft something like,
I'd be
Please,
involved in figuring out how to improve connectivity between the land trust preserves, beaches, and so on. So our kids, my kids are older now, but there's no way to ride a bicycle anywhere.
Yes.
And everybody has, in my neck of the woods, has 2.5 acre lots. There's a big strip in between the budding subdivision that could be used for connectivity. There are, you know, just, we were at a friend's house in Yarmouth just this past weekend. They had trails all over the place. You know, they never have to.
We have a member of the Conservation Commission, and I might argue that trail connectivity is his number one topic that he likes to bring. And he's passionate about it, and he makes sure that it is front of mind, and he's a great advocate for it, and I would love to put you in touch with him. For sure.
Well, so is that just an issue for this person, or is that a council issue?
No,
guys
no,
are-
well, I think that touches on exactly the point that I'm trying to make. That's a great example of one thing, which is when we are discussing something huge, like a exemption to the growth management ordinance, and just forget the downs. Anytime we're gonna get these exemption requests or high density growth requests, we have individuals in the community coming to us and saying, hey, don't forget, we want those trails. Make that part of your priority list. Make that part of what is going to be part of this development. we want crosswalks, we want wooded trails, we want parking access, to those trailheads. And it's that constant reminder of, okay, this is a priority. These are our values for the citizens of Scarborough. We're not just talking about number of units and how many parking spaces they need. We're also talking about these broader issues
Yeah.
that really matter to people.
Well, one of
They're
the-
connected on a very, there's connectivity on a very local level, but there's no
It could be so
cross-town
much better.
connectivity.
Yeah.
Heaven forbid the kid tries to use Route 1 as
Yeah.
get connected to this side of town.
Yeah.
Or the Higgins Beach or Pine Point.
Yeah.
It's just not safe. I mean, I cycle every other day and it's not safe.
What's interesting about this is like, again, the way where my head goes sometimes when we talk about some of these things, like when we say growth, right? We don't really say like what acceptable or a good pace is of like what that looks like. And it's the same thing for connectivity. Like where are we today in terms of trail connectivity? How many miles? And then try and say, where do we want to be in 5 years? We want double those miles, or set something so that we have something to work towards where we can really kind of,
I'll give you a benchmark, it's zero connectivity.
yeah, zero today.
There's great connectivity within the preserves. I mean,
Beautiful
Lancaster has
trails,
great trails.
yeah.
They're beautiful. And,
Eastern Trail connectivity certainly could use,
but you have to drive
Greater
everywhere.
reach.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at sustainability, that's really, it's a lot of gas.
Yeah, I think that came up too in
Yeah.
the meeting, right? Because people were talking about trying to connect to Eastern Trail, which is like really where you want to connect to
Yeah.
if you're trying to connect to it, but it's so hard to figure out how do we actually create connections within the community that are safe and not going through Route 1 or some major thoroughfare, or maybe in the future, like not anytime
just-
soon, but like having something to go over Route 1.
You could just map a route and amongst the subdivisions, say, okay, this is our preferred, this is a
Yeah.
safe route. Have the
Yeah.
police say, this is pretty good.
Yeah.
And just map it out with little, little things that children will say, okay, that's safe. No stranger danger here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, even as a runner, I wouldn't dare ride my bike on the roads, but even as a runner, if you live out in West Scarborough, you have to drive someplace to find a
That's
safe
right.
place to run. I mean, I run on Broad Turn, but it's probably a very bad idea.
And I just suggest if people haven't already to make these comments in the community services master plan survey,
Ah,
because it is very
I have.
closely
So
related.
select individuals, we'll go back to the survey again. Yep, so select individuals were mailed paper copies. If you received a paper copy, make sure you filled that out and get that returned. And then they just recently, yesterday, or the day before, opened up the online version to the rest of the community. So definitely take a minute to click through the online Parks and Master Plan survey.
Mhm. The one piece I want to go back to that you brought up, just thinking coming off the heels of the meeting that was just had with the Conservation and Sustainability Committee was, in our zoning and even with this GMO, we have something called public benefit where we kind of list out things. And I think that list could probably be prescribed a little bit more and a little bit more specific. And so that might be an opportunity for a conversation for conservation and sustainability to say if they really want to do anything that's quicker in terms of, instead of establishing an ordinance, help give more recommendations on how we define, because I think there are conservation related things in there, but there might be an opportunity to get a little bit more specific, again, which can help guide the council as we evaluate things, not just for exemptions, but for contract zones and other things that we might want to change where we're looking for public benefit from the development community. So that could be something too that could be done.
So they could build here and make connectivity there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be, I mean, in theory, like when it comes to public benefit, they can, they can offer what they want to. So if they want to invest in funds to support some sort of fund down the road, maybe that we establish, like the connectivity fund to build better connectivity in the community, that could
Do
be.
that with other things.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, the wetlands bank, if you're
Yeah.
going to disturb something.
Yeah, or if you're gonna cut down a certain amount of trees, you need to put something in this conservation fund that could be used to fund trails, or I don't know. And do do we have anything like that today? I don't think. Yeah.
it would be like an impact fee. Does
like an
anybody
environmental
use the Piper Shores trails or the parking lot? Anybody know what I'm talking about? John, can you help
The lot
me?
that they're building?
Yeah,
or-
well, no, yeah, so I remember, I wasn't on the council at the time, but I remember that being part of the conversation was,
It's something we required as part of the contract, where they, created connectivity to, the wood behind
Infrastructure?
Catch-up.
Yeah.
And it's not open yet, it's still under construction, but it's still part of the plan. I forget how many parking spaces, but we have to open or so.
Yep.
And then you'll be able to park there and access. the
but
trail.
that was part of the discussion. Yeah. So there's an example,
Mhm.
smaller scale, but.
So I have a question, and maybe it's not related, but I'm curious about, when the developer comes in, gets his development, and it's all grown and everything, and then all the streets are put in, does the town take care of all those streets?
They're public right of ways.
So all these developers are not paying for the upgrades of all their streets and this plowing? So the town takes care of all of it, the developers don't pay anything for it?
So they pay to install the roads to the town standards, and once the town determines that they meet our standards, they will be accepted and the town takes over maintenance.
Yes.
Yeah, we just did that in my neighborhood where a couple of weeks ago, we accepted one of the streets that were finally approved. And I'm guessing up until that point, the developer had to maintain the streets and do the plowing. So it's once it's accepted by the town, then the town takes ownership.
So do the developers pay anything for that ongoing,
The people living with the taxes.
Right.
Yeah. So the new people offset it. Marvin?
I have a question. When you were talking about what I will call the council's discretion to define public benefit,
Sure.
that lies with the council, correct?
Mhm.
And if I understood what you were saying is, public opinion could influence council definition of public benefit. Is there any other one, any other mechanism, such as through, I mean, it takes a long time, I understand, definition of public benefit in the ordinance definition section. And my question is, do you have any recommendations to us about how we may leverage our influence to influence the council about their definitions of public benefit beyond what you've already said?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's just like, we have pretty broad terms in there that aren't defined in terms of public benefit, which leaves it open for interpretation, right? And I think one of the things we could do is, again, take each, because I think there's like 10 or 11 different items in there, add some better definition to each of those, which again, helps guide us in decision making. Like that's the thing personally about it that makes me feel, I would like to try and go into these evaluations as objective as possible to determine, is it really meeting public benefit and have it be less, squishy. And so I think personally, I would like to see that. But again, I would love to hear from the public. How would they define the benefit? Like, what are the things that they care about? That's why this forum, I think, is helpful, because it's helping me think about, at least in the context of this topic, what are some things that we should be considering that aren't necessarily written for us, but, we could actually amend that and make very specific things. And then I even think too, another thing we could think about as we do goal setting every year, or even the budget, right? Like some communities, and Councilor Cucci can probably talk to it better than I can, because I think you were there last year, where some towns do a good job thinking of things like conservation as a guiding principle for formulating their budget, to make sure that whatever we're investing in as a community is aligning to some of those key values or those key benefits that the council's prioritized for that year. So I think that's something else we could do in more of like a budgetary perspective, where we can take some goals and ideas and use those to help influence priorities for the year and how we want to focus investments that year and from the budget perspective.
I think I'll just add that, part of that public benefit, I had only been on the council for like 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the first time we were presented a project, and they started throwing out all of their ideas for public benefit, and I was not in agreement that those were of public benefit, and I felt like, well, wait a minute, who is deciding, what this is?
You.
And then, and then John looked up and said, you are. But then I also realized how privileged I am to be the liaison to these two specific committees, conservation and sustainability, because I was viewing public benefit through that lens, basically from day one, as, a new counselor with them as my committees that I was attending their meetings. And I realized that the other counselors were not getting that same prioritization or that same level of conversation about these topics in particular. And so I've been encouraging my committees that I'm the liaison to, like I've said, I'm a broken record, but, to get in front of the council and to help us define what that looks like. And if trail connectivity is of public benefit, then, let's get that in writing. Let's develop some kind of standards around, well, what are you going to do for trail connectivity? Because we've identified that as a priority as a council.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's frustrating. The very first meeting of the Downs, which was held in the racetrack years ago, really. And I was not in favor of this great asset, which was going to be the town center. And as it turns out, the town center is so up in the air, what's in the town center and what, blah, blah, blah. And so, and I kept saying, we already have a town center, and so, everybody knows I'm not in favor of the dance. So. But that's an example, and it didn't matter that I come to the council meetings or whatever about the growth and about towns, and, to me, it's not an asset. But that's okay. It's what it is.
I have one suggestion about the future of council corner
Yeah.
subject,
Sure.
which is defining public benefit.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's a great one.
I think most developers are, past experiences, most developers are focused on this thing. And they're gonna build X lots with maximum development, and they're gonna put aside whatever they need to for conservation easement, whatever. And you leave them to their choices, that's what they'll come with. They'll say, okay, you can have this swamp land,
Mhm.
and I love marshes and swamps, but that's what they'll give you. And if you had a menu of public benefit items that they could choose from, and you identified where they were, in addition to giving us swampland, they might do some additional things.
Mhm.
And they know it coming in,
Mhm.
they would look at our regulations and ordinances and stuff.
And I like that approach because it levels the playing field too on who comes to us. There's definitely a sense that certain developers know how to work the system, whereas another developer might not have any idea. Especially, I can give you an example when they came to us and wanted to potentially have us look at converting Candlewood into apartments rather than a hotel, where the phrase public benefit was getting thrown around by the council. And I can tell you, they're looking at each other and they're looking, through their notebooks. Where does the town define public benefit? They had no idea that was going to be part of the conversation. And so if we had a framework that people knew what it was and what to expect, I think that could be a good tool.
I do love the idea though of Marvin's comment of like helping the council define.
Oh, yeah, I don't want to
and
define
prioritize
that myself,
because-
no.
Because I think, to Nina's point, like not to pick on you, but you may not see the value in the town center, but some people do, and there's some benefit to them. And so we have to look at all of these benefits because, and then try and evaluate them and try and think of like, well, from a community perspective, do those benefits for the majority of the community outweigh those who aren't for it? Because I think we would never, ever have anything before us that everybody's like, yes, everybody's behind it. So, but getting the community to be a part of that conversation to define what public benefit is and what's important and help prioritize it, because there's a lot of things that could come into play. I think that's important. And then I think, to be fair to the developers, if we had that, then rather than just saying, tell us about the public benefit,
Right.
we could say, as a community, we've said trails, blah, 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 the menu. These are things that are important to us. Like, before you even come to us, consider these things and come prepared to say how you're going to support these items, so that we can help you and make a decision. And also the public can hopefully see that the right things are coming forward. I know Denise, you had a comment, so I wanted to.
Denise Hamilton to Rock Road. So with development and developers and public benefit and zoning, it's good to have a long-range planning, and thank you, John. John and I had a very lengthy discussion a few weeks ago over the situation I'm involved in. My property abuts the former Beach Ridge Motor Speedway, and we're in the midst of potentially having a 700,000 square foot warehouse in our backyard. A warehouse that's 4.5 times the size of the proposed Costco over in the Downs. The parking lot across the street from the main grandstands, which was recently closed on, which will be before the planning board at the next meeting, they're looking at putting 200 or more shipping containers. This is going to look like a mini commercial street on the west side of the turnpike. And I think long-range planning needs to look at, back in 2013, which was just before we took over ownership of my husband's family's home, is this an appropriate area to have warehouses, to have shipping containers? We're not on public water or public sewer. Our roads are posted in the winter time. I can count the amount of commercial enterprise on one hand in the Holmes Road, Two Rod Road, Dresser Road, Broadton Road area. And, right now it's water under the bridge as far as concerning us because it's almost a done deal. But I feel sometimes, and I've been at all planning board meetings, and that sometimes it comes across at some of these boards and committees that they're pro-developers rather than pro-residents of this community. My husband and I have, worked 40 to 50 years to get where we are today, to have beautiful home and property that we have put tens of thousands of dollars into since we took over after my father-in-law passed away. And, I read over to the planning board at one of the meetings of the Good Neighbor Ordinance. Where does the Good Neighbor Ordinance come in, in a situation like this? This is not going to help my real estate value. I am telling you that right now. 700,000 square foot building, shipping containers, our value's going to plummet. And where do we stand on something like that? This is not an area for light industrial or industrial. Back in 2013, there were 5 properties on Tree Road that were rural farming with a light industrial overlay. Beach Ridge Motor Speedway was light industrial. Well, they flipped our properties that were now light industrial with a rural farming overlay. And along with Beach Ridge land is light industrial And across the street, a portion, which I find very bizarre, lot 2, a portion of lot 2 is light industrial, and the other portion is rural farming. How does a lot get split zoning? No one's been able to answer that for me. And it just seems very bizarre. I mean, Scarborough Fish and Game, they're rural farming. All the homes, the parking lot across from the pits is rural farming right now. It's just very concerning that, and if any rumors are flying with what this warehouse could be, it's gonna be horrible.
Yeah, I think that is a interesting thing, and I think, you know, I did bring the topic to Councilor Katarina and Hamel about potentially bringing to long range. I'll follow up with them to see if they've been able to see if there can be a conversation about this particular zone, because I know there's more history there than I'm aware of, that some of the members on long range might have, that could help Denise a little bit better understand the rationale behind why it's considered light industrial versus just RF, because I think it's RF around all of it except right there. And I think partially, I'm sure it's because of the connection to 95, I'm guessing that somebody thought in the planning, but again, that was established a long time ago, and it might be worth just a conversation to see if that still makes sense.
I mean, roads are posted, you know, I mean, bringing 18-wheelers in, they're not gonna come over the turnpike because it's posted, you know, from as soon as you come over the turnpike, it's posted. And so I just don't understand it, and they're not allowed to come down Two-Rod Road. It's bad enough, you know, they've repaved, so the speeders have now picked up their speed. So I welcome the police department to hang out in our yard frequently because it's gotten worse.
So what's the benefit to the community
For the
for the warehouse?
Well, so I'm certainly no expert, but I think the difference with, you know, that's important here is they're not applying for a contract zone change.
allowed.
And so it's an allowable use. And so they don't have to, you know, provide public benefit in the same way that other applicants do.
But
Yeah,
where
this
is the good neighbor ordinance? You know, the good neighbor ordinance specifically states, and I don't have it in front of me, I read it at the planning board, but it does state that, you know, it cannot decrease the value of your real estate. And by putting warehouses and shipping containers is going to decrease the value of my house. Just like when my neighbor decided to be a commercial grower. And he decreased the value when it came around for the full assessment. And, you know, I'm hearing rumors that this warehouse could be a manufacturing facility. And I attended all those ordinance meetings and until COVID hit. And I did not think they were going to allow it on the west side of the turnpike. And if that happens, someone can light a torch to my house.
Is it too late?
Too late.
Too late? I mean, is this a done deal?
Well, at this point, it's a private transaction with the former property owner with the new owner. And if their intent to build something that's already under the scope of the zoning, you know, I think if we were to change it, my assumption is they would probably get grandfathered into whatever they purchased under, because I'm sure they're purchasing it under the pretense that they can use it for the qualified uses that are already in our zoning. Which Denise and I talked a little bit about is like that's my understanding is that like if there's a private transaction happening and it's already in our zoning, that
It's not so much a transaction, it's if they've gotten planning board approval and then activity within the time frame that it's filed.
So if you change the zoning, you get sued.
You can change the zoning, but that doesn't take away their right to develop the property if you have it zoned.
Yeah.
Right.
yeah.
And I don't know where it's going to go.
If
We can't
they
vote.
haven't even, as far as the Beach Ridge, land, that hasn't even, they haven't even gone to phase 2, only because of the side situation that we're having with the developer. But the lot across, from Beach Ridge parking lot, that is going before planning board on the 27th in phase 2.
Mhm.
You know, and I looked at when Eric sent me, or I was part of the email blast, today, the map shows 200 plus shipping containers.
Long range planning did talk about that, within the last 6 months, maybe slightly less than that. And I don't, again, as far as having your voice heard and community voices heard, I would urge that the senior planner bring it back to long range planning committee's attention. Not that anything, I mean, our long range is out further than that, but to get the issue you're raising.
I've been in front of the senior planner since last November, because I made them aware that there are cremated remains on the property of Beach Ridge Motor Speedway, including my father-in-law and my husband's grandfather who founded Beach Ridge Motor Speedway. And so I've been in front of the town planner, or in front of both Eric and Jay, who I guess Jay's no longer with the town, since November when I made them aware.
That's sounding familiar.
Yes.
And then I make a pitch, for, filling Jay's position, and having a full planning staff, obviously, so, you know, that's another issue.
Who is the current liaison with Jay leaving to long range, do you know?
I expect
Karen Martin.
Martin.
Karen.
Yeah.
Karen is, so it might be worth,
Which is economic development,
yeah.
Right.
you
Yeah,
know,
that's-
which to me, I watch long range planning all the time and to see, and Karen's great, don't get me wrong, but to see economic development sharing long range planning is basically.
And she is
She's a pro
development of the
Well,
west
that's,
side
well,
of
that's, well, it's a
the
job,
turnpike.
you know,
Yeah.
it's a job.
It's really Eric.
Eric,
Karen.
so we can follow up with Eric again to see if we can get this on a long range planning agenda just for further conversation. So I just want to kind of bring us back to conservation and sustainability a little bit. Are there any other, I think this meeting was scheduled to go till 8, but if there are other people who want to raise a topic specific to the topic, you know, we'd love to hear you before we close.
Well, this is sort of part and parcel, and we're talking about too late to change zoning. So, and Councilor Clutie has heard this already. No, I guess you weren't, yeah, you were, right? Yeah, so, a concern of mine is the solar farm development. And I was vocal, when it was in the planning stages, and if memory serves me, there were 4 properties that were expressed interest in, solar farm development in Scarborough. 2 were landfills, one of them is the old Eco name, and if I get it wrong, tell me, because I have to jog my memory on this. And that makes perfect sense to put solar, large, well, we call it large scale utility solar development. Makes perfect sense to put it on a landfill where you can't do anything else with the land. It's a benefit to the town because if you're not leasing it, at least it cuts the, you know, it saves expense for the town and, you know, municipal and school energy costs. But also, in the first stage of this, there were private property owners who had also been approached by probably out-of-state solar developers who were interested in leasing their land to plunk down solar farms. And so my concern is that so what was suggested, what I suggested is to create an overlay where this might be appropriate in town. but rather than a geographic overlay, the overlay was by acreage. So the ordinance as it stands today is anything in the industrial, light industrial, or rural farmland that's 25 acres or more is a permitted use is utility scale solar development. Okay, so the ordinance was adopted last fall. And now the sustainability committee has come back wanting to lessen the performance standards because there are some people, I'm assuming some of the private property owners, I don't know exactly who is involved, but they were not eligible because the performance standards in the ordinances that was adopted didn't allow for cutting trees down. And it also doesn't allow for agricultural use. And so, Jamie, you didn't hear what I had to say in ordinance today because you had already left. But, you know, we're lessening the standard. They're, you know, these are very lucrative contracts between, again, mostly out-of-state solar developers that there's no, and not that there has to be a benefit to Scarborough, but there's no benefit to Scarborough. And there are about 100 properties in town that fit the criteria. And over in what I call the Spurlink Road, Black Point Road corridor, there's 3 on Spurlink Road, there's 3 on Black Point Road, and there's 1 on Marion Jordan Road. And, you know, we even though we're zoned as RF, it's really a rural residential area. When we were going through the marijuana ordinance for the first time, I learned in planning that that area actually used to be zoned as rural residential, but it was changed to rural farmland to encourage agriculture. This is not agriculture. This is basically, these are basically commercial power plants, and they really have no place in a residential neighborhood. So that is something that I hope that, you know, the council, the ordinance committee passed it, it's going to the first read, but I hope that the council will consider either doing a real overlay or rezoning part of town before we can't rezone, you know, before it's too late to rezone.
Here.
Yeah.
Is there anything about viewshed ordinance in Scarborough?
I'm not familiar with that.
Not to my knowledge.
Because a lot of these things can really, you know, when you're looking at it, when you move into a town, you know, you can expect there's going to be houses and whatnot. Expect that, but, you know, somebody puts 700,000 square foot warehouse with shipping containers, that changes your view shed quite a bit. And your hearing shed too, your you know, the noise. And I know the state planning office, when it existed, had some criteria that they would use for, or criteria they would use for determining whether something is acceptable within the view shed. And I really think that's the source of a lot of our angst when it comes to development.
It's not, that sounds more appropriate to me than tipping back to the good neighbor ordinance. Like something, if we, I've never heard this, so I'll have to look
Yeah.
into
Well,
what other
I don't
towns
think
do,
it
but.
exists in Scarborough,
It's a
but also,
view shed.
yeah,
you should-
and you have something that changes your view.
Yeah,
It's big, can be a big deal. I mean, we all tolerate the racetrack because it's been there forever and they only raced twice a year. You know, if they had raced 5 days a week, you know, from sun up to sundown, it would have been a different story. You know.
We figured the racetrack was there before any of the houses were there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, my husband's grandfather owned all that land, and now it's, you know, three of the 4 houses to the side of the pits are family.
But all I'm trying to
Yeah.
equate that to is all the noise that's gonna
Yeah.
be going on. Compare that
Yeah.
to the racetrack.
Two days,
Two
you
nights a
know,
week.
for 4 months
So
of the
is
year.
this preventable? Is it preventable?
What's preventable?
Preventable that this land will be taken for this, for this.
Well,
The ordinance is being reviewed.
Yeah, the ordinance is being reviewed, and there's basically, correct me if I'm wrong, there's basically two ways that land can be used for utility scale solar. If the developer came in and purchased the land, or a lot of developers are approaching people who own tracts of land because they're all looking for places to put down their solar panels. And so, you know, if you're a private property owner and one of these people, one of these companies, you know, approaches you, and I'm totally empathetic too with, like, you know, if there are farmers that are trying to hold on to family land that has been in their family for 100 years. I mean, my great grandparents were dairy farmers, so I get it, you know, the importance of hanging on to your land. But if that land is in what has become a residential area, you know, again, these you know, acres of solar panels are basically commercial power plants, and it's not necessarily power that's going to benefit Scarborough. The one that's being developed on the landfill will benefit Scarborough because it's going to offset some of the cost of energy for the town and for the school. So there's a benefit to the taxpayers for that. But this is private property, so, you know, the way it's been developed is that, you know, when it was first enacted, the performance standard didn't allow cutting trees down. So now what's being revisited is, help me here, Jane, you know, percentage of trees would be cut down and replanted. But the down Port Katarina's point this afternoon, if it's mature trees, it takes 50 years for them to come back. And, you know, you're abutting residential, you know, neighbors that, you know, these farms will devalue their property too. And plus, even though they got buffers and all that kind of stuff, you know, it's not going to grow up overnight, and it just changes the aesthetic and for lack of a better word, the character, the word that nobody wants to use. You know, if you're driving down Spurway Road and you've got these beautiful green canopies of trees and that kind of thing, and then over here is a solar.
Yeah.
You know,
But just to put a little bit of perspective on that, not every place that's 25 acres can have a solar because you have to have three-phase power. And a
Well,
lot of
there's
these areas
precedent.
do not have three-phase power.
Well, the maps, and again, I look at my area of town, and I think it's important for the entire town. The maps that were presented that shows where that power is included Spurway Road.
In some areas, yeah, but I'm just saying, generally speaking, there's a lot of 25-acre lots available, but not all of them are applicable for a utility scale solar
Right.
farm.
Well, and the other argument you hear a lot with, again, you know, depending on where in town, is that, you know, developers don't buy the land because it's cost prohibitive. You know, the land is too valuable. But, you know, it doesn't stop somebody from leasing land from somebody who already owns it. And if, you know, the town allows it and that land happens to be in what is really a residential area, then it's, you know, changes the nature of where you live. And there should be predictability for people.
So where does it stand with the ordinance?
It's just going to council at the next council meeting, I think.
It was approved to be moved to council. I'm not
To move to
sure if it'll
council.
be on the next agenda. I do
Yeah,
just
yeah,
want to
yeah.
point out, though, that the solar ordinance is the only section of our zoning ordinance that prohibited cutting trees. So those landowners who might want to develop their land for solar, if they're not allowed to, they could sell it off and build more roads and more house lots, and then the landscape is changed forever. Solar development is temporary. It's usually there for 20 to 50 years. And when it's decommissioned, the land can be reverted back. So if we're converting farmland, the farmland can go back to production. Yes, we might not get those old growth oak trees back for 50 to 100 years, but we're not going to have houses and roads there in perpetuity. So it is a trade-off, but these are things that ordinance essentially made it more attractive for developers or for landowners to sell off their land for a subdivision than to lease it to a solar company and put in solar panels.
Yeah, there's a bit of a trade-off, right? So,
And it's
I
their-
just don't, I wish they would just say the same.
We all do, but that's not reality.
Just leave it alone.
The concept of view shed does exist in the ordinance, and it's applied location by location.
But I'm sorry.
The concept of view shed does exist in the ordinance, and it is protected, as I have experience with it, it's very limited. Location by location, I think you could make an argument for view shed.
mhm.
Right, well, and also as Council Quincy, Chairman Quincy, I should say, pointed out
John is
this
fine.
afternoon.
Good chair.
But that in shoreland, I guess I'd have to read the shoreland zoning that would preclude cutting down trees. But I'm not sure if, I mean, what Jamie presented today had a list of 100 properties that are 25 acres and over in the industrial, by industrial, and, rural farmland. And so I'm not sure if the ones that are over on Spurwink or 5 Point Road, I mean, Marion Jordan, I'm guessing, would be in shoreland, but there's nothing in the draft of the amended ordinance that, precludes shoreland.
Shoreline zoning applies no matter if the development is being proposed within the shoreline zone, then the shoreline zoning applies. And so they can be able to cut any trees within the shoreline zone.
Well, we don't, because of the fact. I'm new to this, as I said, but where would I start to get the town of Scarborough to stop spraying and using insecticides and pesticides? You know, since Portland and stuff, oh, they've already done that, and we have all of this wonderful area here, and we're killing it every single day. Where would I start? You need an ordinance for that?
We have an ordinance.
We have a policy.
We have a policy. Oh, thank you. Not a distinction.
Do we have the sheriff conservation?
Yeah.
And we have
right
the
there.
Sheriff Conservation Commission here.
That's the place for it to start.
Yeah,
Okay, I'll have to get you. And I'll give you my.
So is the ordinance going to change so that trees can be cut down? Is that what's going on?
I haven't
Oh, yeah,
seen,
we have- it hasn't
it
come to the
literally
full
happened
council.
today, right? Like it happened just
Just went to
3 hours ago.
ordinance
It is
Yeah.
available on the
Go to
website.
the next
So
meeting.
today, you
Yes,
can cut down trees
Nina.
anywhere unless
today.
you're.
It'll be a first
Including
reading when
on
it
the
gets
farm.
scheduled.
And will it make any difference?
It-
If we go
It's a law.
to the first reading and we talk and say, look, don't change the ordinance, will that make any difference? No.
I think it does. I mean, so there's been a couple times tonight when I like almost interrupted to remind everybody that these are John and I's views, right? Like, so we make ourselves available. Other counselors may host their own Counselor Corner Live on topics. I don't know. Right now, it's you get John and I. But you know,
And John.
and John. So these are our, takes and perspectives on what the appropriate measures are, what the channels would be, because that's, kind of our line of thinking, creating a matrix of public benefit. I think John and I have some energy around this, and we may say this to the rest of the council, and it may totally go off a cliff, right? So these are all places to start. So Mina, your question kind of is like a broad question to me, which is when public comes and takes their time and prepares a statement and speaks at public comment, does it matter? And I will always say yes to that. So there are definitely times when public comment raises an issue that I never would have thought of, or a perspective that I don't feel is being represented, or a question even where the council says, I'd like to see that question addressed before I consider voting on this. And so I think from my perspective, public comment absolutely could sway the conversation,
Yeah, I
no
think-
matter what the topic is.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of being persistent, and you were very persistent, which is good. Because again, you came yesterday to talk to the council about the manufactured housing, and you raised something that I just captured a note of, like, I need to go back and reread that section and make sure I'm interpreting it the way you interpreted it, and if I am, then I might propose something to address your concern. And then same thing for the RF or Highland, like having you come again, seeing the planning board minutes, which is again, another kind of public body that has an opinion, that all kind of factors into our decision-making, I think. So even tonight, like the things you're bringing, I think are really, really helpful because these aren't things that were on a formal agenda for us to discuss. So it just gives us more thoughts to think about and bring back to the council or help direct people to other opportunities to bring, like connecting Randy with Patricia and, you know, hearing more, Denise, about your concern where we have a long-range planning member. The thing about Scarborough that's great is everybody's involved. It's really about how do we navigate the system to help support decision-making because there's so many ways in and trying to make sure that it gets into the system in a way that, you know, gets heard and groomed and can help with decision-making is important.
I think we have a thoughtful council. Like I genuinely do. I think that we have an open-minded body. I think we have people who certainly don't agree. And there are going to be times when people make beautiful, impassioned public comment and I simply just disagree. I see it from a different perspective and that obviously happens. And so I certainly wouldn't want someone to feel like they weren't heard just because maybe we don't disagree. And, you know, sometimes we don't deliberate very much at all on these votes. And sometimes, you know, John will call for the vote and we all just put our hands up. But if it's one where a person has come and spoken, or we know that there's like a particular amount of public interest, I think we as a council do a good job trying to explain our perspective before we vote so that people do realize, like, we did hear you, we just see it from this perspective instead. And so, you know, that's definitely part of, you know, our process. So, you know, don't, you know, stay engaged.
I know it's
for
late.
sure.
It's really late.
Oh, that's
I just want to, probably should raise this. Is there anything in the works to look at the GMO and to kind of really look at that and realize, you know, some of these exemptions, maybe there are too many loopholes, and maybe looking at the ordinance and, you know, and tightening things up a little bit?
Well, the GMO is brand new. And we're really, I mean, I think as a body, we're really kind of going through this first process, and that will give us insight into the growing pains we're having and what we can do to change. But we wouldn't necessarily have known those pieces until we kind of go through at least part of this process. And so there isn't discussion right now that I've been privy to about, you know, going back and attacking the GMO. But we, I think, recognize some of the points that need refinement.
Yeah, for me personally, I would say it's I do think it does need to get revisited. It's a matter of when is it going to get revisited, to Councilor Slather's point. Like right now is not the time, but I like personally, and I've even talked to Councilor Clucci about it, or Chair Clucci about it at one point where I'm like, just John. Yeah, sorry. John, that like I might even take a stab personally at just rewriting something myself just to kind of see what the other possibilities could be. Because I need to see it. That's how I work. I need to like see it written to see if it even makes sense. And so, you know, I do think that there's some energy to kind of revisit it at some point. I just don't know when. I mean, technically we have to revisit it every 3 years. So there will be a point where we're forced to by state law to revisit it. That doesn't mean we can't revisit it sooner. I think again, it just goes back to, is it the will of the entire council? Is it a priority for the council that we want to make it a priority?
When will the discussion on the exemption for downs, when will that take place?
We just talked about that briefly last night, that the lawyers have the final documentation hopefully ready for real time. We discussed as a council how we wanted to go about that, whether the council wanted to go into executive session or whether we wanted to have a public workshop. We're going to do it via public workshop, which I know makes some councilors particularly uncomfortable because we're going to be seeing it at the same time as the public. And so that can be kind of bumbly and awkward, but I don't mind being bumbly and awkward. So, so that's the way we're going to go with it. And I think probably you should expect to see a special meeting or something, because we don't meet again until July 20th. as our
Officially.
regular scheduled summer schedule.
Mhm.
And so I definitely think that it's
Yeah.
the council's intent to meet before then.
We even talked about this particular night potentially having been on, specifically on the GMO. But I had suggested until we have it, we might have forums
Right,
like
we can
this.
have a forum like this
Yeah.
on the GMO.
Yeah, and that's something I think that we've talked about is like at that first workshop, it's less about what's before us, but more hopefully a little bit more about what's the public process we want to go through to engage. And even this week with the joint meeting, the committee started to have a conversation, right? And I think we can, part of that process could be to go back to some of the committees that we have to say, help us think a little bit more through this before we go back to the downs. And again, that would be, those committees also are good forums to hear from the public about what's important to them relative to their scope. So like, again, some of these conversations tonight, I don't know how that changes or adds to the ideas that came out this week in the joint committee, but it might give them more ideas that they would come back to the council with recommendations on. Yep, in the back.
I just have a real quick question about
Mhm.
I just had a quick question for Marvin. On the coastal committee that you're on, are you representing Scarborough or are you there on your own?
Well, I'm a resident, community member of the committee.
So it's a Scarborough committee?
It's a town committee.
Okay.
Correct.
Now, is this the one that's tied in with the coastal towns from like Kittery to Dunn? Is this the group?
That may be above my pay grade.
I don't believe that it is.
It's not?
It's not.
What's that one? You know?
Yeah, well, that's what it used to be, but sea level rise adaptation working group. There's a group now that's being coordinated by the Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission to look at coastal hazards and opportunities for resiliency from Kittery to Scarborough.
Right.
GPCOG is taking up a similar effort that is going to be from Scarborough to Freeport. So there's two kind of parallel efforts going on. Scarborough's involved in both.
We manage the docks and the moorings and the dredging and that sort of thing. Lots of moors.
Now, I heard that if they dredge the river again, it might be, some of the sand might be going to one of the islands, like Stratton Island.
I have not heard that, but
The plan is the Western Beach
Western Beach, yeah.
primarily, and there was some talk about Marriott Pond Point that was requested as well. The initial dredging went to basically 3 feet outside. Because it was emergency.
It will definitely happen again.
Sand goes south and goes around, the sand is that in Pine Point, not the P. That does work on.
You know, the same rain side.
There's two, pathways. One is on the north side of the island, and it is on the south side. So it's can't help but see the process. That's a lot of work on.
So we're a little over, and we want to be respectful of everybody's time. So we want to thank you all for coming and taking the time today. If you guys,
Oh, geez.
yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for guys coming and sharing your feedback. Again, we're trying to do these quarterly, and feel free to email us if you have ideas or topics. Like I love the topic, Marvin, that you brought up. I know Allison, you brought up an idea.
Engage process.
Yeah.
And I think the public, just from some of the questions here tonight, if you're not plugged in, even if you are plugged in,
Yeah,
it's
still
very
difficult.
hard
Mhm.
to follow the path of where something starts and then it ends up at council. And I just find from my own experience, 9 times out of 10, by the time it gets to the first read, it's over. And, we have also heard, a planning board and in other places, with the GMO, that, we've been talking about this for 2 years, and the public has had their opportunity to speak up, but if the public's not aware, and the public doesn't know how to become aware, it's, so I think some kind of civics lesson or, the process of getting engaged and involved to follow topics, I think, is,
That would be so great, and then I wouldn't be talking to the children when I shouldn't be.
He likes
No
it.
such thing.